Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. We are going to be talking with Chief Justice Jon Jensen of the North Dakota State Supreme Court. And the reason why we're having Justice Jensen on is he is stepping down, not from the court. He is stepping down as Chief Justice. He's had a tenure there where, the court has been undergoing some changes. I mean, there was a lot of weirdness during the pandemic era, which sort of imposed some change on us that maybe we wouldn't have chosen otherwise. But, certainly we saw at the legislature, we saw, at the courts, started doing some things differently. Since being there, I know that Justice Jensen has been an advocate for technological innovation, bringing that in, but now stepping aside and going to let one of his colleagues on the state Supreme Court step up and become Chief Justice. Now, the way that election works is obviously the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court are elected by the voters, but the Chief Justice on the court is elected by the justices on the court as well as the district court judges around the state. So basically, the judiciary. Chief Justice Jensen, thanks for coming on, first of all.
Thank you for inviting me.
Tell us about your decision not to seek another term as Chief Justice.
Yeah, just very briefly, a couple of things in my personal life. I have an older brother who's always been a role model to me, went to law school before I did, who is experiencing some health challenges. So that was one of the things that was on the back of my mind. And then I had just kind of a freak accident at the beginning of October where I broke 7 ribs. And it just kind of it kind of made me realize that our health can be fleeting. And although I enjoy being the Chief Justice and I like the challenges, I want to maximize some of the time I have with my spouse. My spouse has also kind of been battling a chronic illness for 40 years now. So I want to make sure that whatever time we have together, I maximize that.
Now, are you gonna be just one question? But I swear I'll let Pat ask a question eventually. Are you the terms for the state Supreme Court are 10 years. You were last elected in 2020, so you're halfway through, roughly, your current term. Do you plan on finishing your term in office?
Yeah, I plan on finishing my term. That's my plan right now. That could change, but at least right now I plan on finishing my term. We could probably have a whole show on whether we should judges should end it at the end of their term or if they should end early and let the governor go.
I mean, the reason
appointment.
I asked is because so many of your colleagues, certainly in the past, get appointed. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't seem like. In fact, I think it was Justice Tufte, the last one who ran in a straight up election and not appointed to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think it was Justice Tufte.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. A lot of it, though, is just simply timing when folks become eligible for retirement. And at least I will tell you from a Supreme Court perspective, our term runs from September through June. We do hear cases during July and August, but they're limited to either cases that can be brought directly to the Supreme Court or else emergencies. So from a timing standpoint and having a new justice on the court, that August date is really a convenient date. Somebody doesn't have to jump in the middle of a term.
As I recall, you were appointed to your position originally, if I remember correctly, and then you ran for your first and maybe only term. So tell me about that experience. You mentioned before not jumping into the deep water right away. But tell me about, kind of your experience being able to kind of run before you or walk before you run, which would strike me as something that would be helpful because to try and run and then immediately serve would strike me, especially in something as complicated and technical as the Supreme Court. There are, I would think, some advantages to that kind of a process as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think the primary advantages have to do with candidates to fill those positions. It's actually relatively new in terms of our state history that there's a lengthy delay. It used to be that it was the next general election that folks that were appointed would have to run. The problem with that is convincing somebody to leave private practice if the general election is 3 months later. So terminate their business, get rid of all their clients, and then potentially face reelection, or not potentially, but face reelection in a relatively short period of time. And if you lose, you're kind of now you're kind of left in that limbo area. You've terminated your practice and you're not sitting on the bench. So I think the rule change was to allow folks who were appointed to sit for at least 2 years. And so if a general election pops up in that initial 2-year period, you don't have to run. But so about the maximum amount of time could be about 3 years.
Well, I was just going to follow up to that. And obviously governors like the opportunity to appoint people to the Supreme Court, but I would also think that kind of environment, giving them a couple of years, also takes some of the pressure off of just making the decision on who can win, but also giving people an opportunity to demonstrate that they have the chops to do the job well. I would think that not only is it a benefit to attracting good candidates or the process of ingratiating or, kind of getting into the job, but it also creates an environment where the candidates, for a lot of different reasons, including the governor appointment, is helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. It's not something I had thought of before, but I think you're right. That's a really good observation.
One thing that I heard from a lot of people when you announced you were running again for Chief Justice was that, like, boy, that was a brief term. And I was thinking about that a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, but are we measuring because his predecessor was on the court for what was it, 44 years and was the
Yeah.
Chief Justice for a significant amount of that time? Obviously we're coming out of the Justice of Van de Waal era, and I guess that maybe skewed our expectations a little bit for
Yeah.
staying in that position.
Well, it's people also forget that Chief Justice Erikstead served as Chief Justice for 20 years. So we went through a 50-year period with only 2 Chief Justices. So it's quite lengthy. No, change is healthy, I think. I think it can be a good thing. So
One question. Go ahead, Rob. Your
Well, I
turn.
was going to ask about your time on the court. You really focused on technological innovations. Tell us about some of that. One big one I know was putting all the court records online, and I think we ended up getting the cart in front of the horse a little bit on that one when we found out that maybe great idea. I was 100% for it. The problem is we haven't been doing a great job about taking out some of the private data or maybe curating some of the information that's available online. But talk about some of the other initiatives that you've brought to the court.
sure. And can I back up a little bit and just put
Sure.
some context on our judicial system? And I'll try to be brief. My colleagues, I like statistics, and I bring out these statistics all the time. And sometimes my colleagues get tired of hearing them. But this is a new audience, right? So our judicial system has somewhere between 160,000 and 180,000 cases each year. We have 55 district court judges. So if you can think about that, that's a pretty large caseload that each one of our district court judges has to manage each year. A recent study by the National Center for State Courts actually revealed that our district court judges have more felony cases than any other judge in the United States. So again, they're pressed with regard to caseloads. In addition, unlike a lot of states, our judges are judges of general jurisdiction. So we don't have a criminal court judge, a civil court judge, a family court judge, or a juvenile court judge. Every one of our judges has to do every one of those things. So if you can imagine, our judges get up in the morning, they may have family law cases in the morning, criminal cases in the afternoon. It's a lot to ask from them at the district court level. And then we live in North Dakota. There's geographical challenges as well. We have some of our districts that have in excess of a dozen counties. And the judges, we expect our judges to appear in each one of those counties at some time. Everybody in North Dakota deserves to have local court system. And so again, those are three big challenges for our judges. Caseloads, the subject matter, the judges of general jurisdiction, but then also just geographical challenges. So, I think technology is one of the ways we can solve that. And so one of you had mentioned the pandemic, and one of the things that the court tried to do during the pandemic is make sure we kept our doors open. And we were able to do that pretty successfully through what we refer to as reliable electronic means. That's what we're doing now. Zoom hearings, those types of things. And Justice Crothers and Justice Tufte, along with a number of our district court judges, really did a great job in kind of developing a procedure to do that. And that's really carried forward from the pandemic forward. And again, we leave each one of our trial judges with discretion on when they want to use it, when it's appropriate. And there are, of course, constitutional limitations. I think it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to hold a criminal trial over Zoom, with the right to confront witnesses and those types of things. But our judges have done a great job of taking the framework that Justice Tufte and Justice Crothers built and using it in ways that are appropriate. So that was one of the things. And another thing that was kind of on my priority list was the court, in my view at least, was inappropriately kind of pulled into the way child support enforcement was being done. The executive branch has a child support enforcement unit. They have attorneys. They have a lot of staff. But somewhere along the line, the court system got into the practice of entering data into their system, but not only entering data, but issuing notices, those types of things. So you can imagine the conflict when someone was disputing the propriety of a notice that the court system itself had generated. So that was, I think, returning that child support notice function back to the executive branch was a good thing. Additionally, we have looked at what's coming up, and I think that's important to take a look at. I noticed you had a note at the beginning of this that AI is going to be used to transcribe. I don't know when perfect transcription by AI is going to take place. Is it going to be 3 years from now? Is it going to be 6?
Yeah.
It's going to happen
perfect now. I do use it. I upload the audio and I use it to pull the quotes out. But I will tell you, because the nice thing is along with the words, it'll drop me right to where that quote happened. I go back and listen again because it makes mistakes.
Yeah. Oh, that's a relatively new function, by the way, to be able to hit that transcript and go back to the audio. We can do that internally in the court system now.
It's beautiful. It's very nice.
And that's one of the changes we're looking at is right now the official record is the transcript. But when you think of it, we designated the transcript as the official record back when our court system was dominated by folks that use stenographic machines. We didn't have audio recordings. So the stenographic notes, nobody else could read them. I mean, there was no practical way to make those the official record. But now we record every proceeding, and in fact, we have relatively few people that in fact, in the United States, there are getting to be fewer and fewer that due to the stenographic. Instead, everybody records and then makes the transcript from the recording. And as most people will agree, you can't have a transcript taken from a recording that's more accurate than the recording itself. So one of the things we're looking at is making that change to having the digital audio as actually the official recording. Still using the transcripts. We're not going to, I mean, a lot of folks prefer to read rather than listen. Nothing wrong with that. But making that, and if you have a question, as you said, just being able to click on that transcript, pull up the audio and hear what was actually said. But you have to, getting back to the, when is it going to be perfect? I don't know. But that impacts who are you hiring? Are you still going to continue to hire people that are doing transcription? When I think technological event, again, whether it's in 3 years, 5 years, is going to take over that function.
One of the questions I had for you today is obviously the casework, the number of cases you deal with have grown fairly rapidly over the last few years, the last decade, certainly. How did you address that, and how was it that, you were able to manage that? What changes did you make? And how did it go working with the legislature? Because obviously some of this has to be done by, the FTEs you have, the budgets you have, those kinds of things. How did you accomplish maintaining a relatively reasonable, I don't want to call it good, because I know a lot of your contemporaries, both in the Supreme Court but also at the district court level, put in a lot of hour to keep up with it. But how are you addressing that, and how have you addressed that?
Sure. And I think there are a number of different things we did. Let's start with the legislature. And I will say that legislature has been a very good partner. We are separate branches of government. It's a little awkward during the legislative session. You've got one branch of government asking for the other branch of government for funding. But they've always been receptive to what our requests are, and think about our requests thoughtfully. We don't always get everything we ask for, but again, I think they've been really good partners. And so looking at the legislature, they have added some FTEs. They've added 3 judgeships. We can't add judgeships without the legislature approving those additional judicial positions. So again, adding the judgeships has helped. Those judgeships were added in our busiest districts. That would be the districts that include Fargo, Bismarck, Grand Forks, are 3 of those districts. Additionally, something else that we've done, and this was through our case flow management committee and how we have cases flow through our system. Judge Robin Schmidt, who is chambered in the Northwest Judicial District, she's done a great job and developed a dashboard that allows our judges to track everything instantly. It also allows the Chief Justice, who's responsible for reviewing docket currency and cases under advisement. I can pull up any individual judge at any time and see what's sitting on their desk and what needs to be decided. And we have some pretty, very specific deadlines for docket currency, which is from the time a case is filed to the time it's decided, that I review. And then additionally, the other thing is cases under advisement. And that's the time that something hits the judge's desk, like a motion, or there's been a bench trial, to the date that it's decided. And we have deadlines for every one of those things. And we can watch those. So that's another thing that has helped out. Also, something that has helped out is just our electronic file management has gotten much better, particularly here at the Supreme Court. It's something that most people don't see, but we have kind of evolved into having electronic transfer of files rather than moving paper around.
What about the online access to records? We did it for a bit. We shut it off. That's been years now. Is there still a plan to implement that, or is it just going to be too arduous, or what's the update on that?
Yes, it will be implemented. What we're kind of what we're doing currently now is the question is compliance with our court rule that requires you to remove sensitive information or private information. And it's a matter of getting that compliance up to an appropriate rate. One of the problems I think that some people discovered were with regard to traffic citations. That was probably one of the areas where the most identifying information was, because what was happening is those were getting filed into our system just as the ticket, which has a lot of information. So it's a matter of making sure that we don't have that information in our system. And then what we'll do is a look forward. Once we get that compliance rate up to something that is acceptable, and we're not going to get, hopefully we can get close to 100%. And I think with some of the new filing procedures that we're going to start implementing, we will get those up to 100% or darn close. But then we'll have that public access online forward rather than any backward looking.
I will appreciate that. As a reporter, I was working on a
Yeah.
story out of Minot about our mayoral election, and I had one was a criminal record in North Dakota, and the other was a criminal record in Florida. And I got to tell you, accessing the Florida record was a lot more fun. And not that and I shouldn't complain. I mean, I've spent years, even before I was a reporter, working at the courthouse staff is almost across the board perfect. They are really great to work with. I've always had good experiences, but the system is the system. So at this point, we have Justice Tufte and Justice McEvers have announced their candidacies for your position. Is that over now? Or could another one emerge, or is that?
Now, the date for putting your name on the ballot has passed. So
And
those
then
are the two
the
kind of.
votes will be counted here in about a month, December 10th.
Yeah, I think that's the date. Yep.
Yeah. Any preference between the two, or do you want to tell us how you
Not
voted?
not gonna. I haven't voted yet. So I can show you my blank ballot.
Okay.
So no, I'm not going to express a preference. I will say this, that I think all of my colleagues on the bench, district court bench, and then at the Supreme Court will think about this thoroughly. But God, we have some challenges coming up. There's technology changes. There's other things, and one of the things that factored into my decision not to run again is this job could be very simple. You can perform as chief the kind of ceremonial duties, and really, if you're not being proactive, it would be a pretty simple job. That's not what I believe the role should be. I think that the chief needs to be a little bit more proactive, needs to be forward looking, which is hard to do. We have lots of judges who have been on the bench for 20 years and they have a few years left and maybe don't want to have change. But that's the role of the chief is to look forward and to make sure that the judicial system and it's going to take some work going forward the next 5-10 years.
I have one question, kind of tangent to what we talked about before, and that was, I'm not usually the guy who's out there championing for, big pay increases for certain categories of state employees. But one of the things, and I've done some candidate recruitment along the way, one of the challenges is that the court system didn't always pay pretty well. And it meant that oftentimes, especially candidates for the Supreme Court, had to have a career before they could actually volunteer their service to come into the sector. Has that improved, or is there more work to be done in terms of making sure? Because obviously in a profession like legal profession, you're going to attract different calibers of talent based on what you can pay. Where are we at in that?
I think we've done a great job over the last 5 years increasing pay. I think we can do more. I think judicial pay is competitive with other state pay. But it's not competitive with private practice, or at least for most people in private practice. And for me, it's not necessarily equality. We have lots of great people that are candidates from, for example, another state position, where the pay on the bench is good pay comparative to that. Um, but where I think the pay makes a big difference is in the diversity of our candidates. We may get the same quality, but I think it's helpful to have somebody who's been in private practice on the bench. I think it's helpful to have somebody who's been a prosecutor, somebody who's been a defense attorney. And so that's where I think it's that diversity that I think gets to be lacking when the pay doesn't keep up. At least it's never probably going to reach 100%, but at least competitive to that private practice.
So should we be electing judges, or should they be hired on their vitae, for lack of a better way? I mean, is that where do you see that coming down?
I see two things. One is we live in a populous state. That's the foundation of our state is public elections. You're accountable, right? You're accountable for the decisions you make. The downside of being accountable for the decisions you make is if you have someone sitting on the bench who decides to make decisions based on politics as opposed to based on what the law does. So again, there's the trade-off. But I like the accountability. I think it's good for our system, and I think it's also a testament to how good our trial court judges do, that they're not challenged very often. Which means at least the perception is that they're doing a good job.
I wanted to just, I'm sorry.
One thing, and then I'll promise that I'll give it back to you. But along that same line of thought is, you've been really on the term side of the equation. Is there an argument to be made, or is the current system adequate? Should we have termed U.S. Supreme Court justices, just like we do in North Dakota? You have a 10-year term, and I think it should be a longer term. But I mean, which environment do you think creates the best legal environment for either the state or the nation, or should we look to moving past lifetime appointments?
Boy, I think that's the $1,000,000 question. There's positives and negatives, right? If you have the lifetime appointment, theoretically, you're insulated from those, from political or public opinion type pressure. On the other hand, as you've indicated, you're not accountable, or as at least I indicated earlier, you're not accountable. So I don't know which one's better. They've both worked well. The federal system has lifetime appointments. I think for the most part that's worked well. And the state, at least North Dakota, has had elections. I think we have a great bench in North Dakota. And I'll get back to statistics just for a second, to let you know how well our district court judges are performing. We have docket currency rates that are at the top of the United States, even though we have really high caseloads. And I was talking about those 160 to 180,000 cases. We actually only see about 300 appeals a year. That means for all of those cases that are going through our district courts, there's only about 300 times where a litigant thinks the judge either didn't treat them fairly or got the law wrong. So again, I think we're doing well in North Dakota with our district court judges.
I wanted to see, we had a debate on the podcast not that long ago between myself, I guess representing the news media perspective, and my good friend Anna Martin from the F5 Project, who I think just does fabulous work overall. But he and others were successful in lobbying for a change to access to court records, particularly in criminal proceedings, where if the court reaches a conclusion, like it's an acquittal or a dismissal or something like that, those records become sealed after a certain amount of time. And I understand the logic behind it, because everyone's presumed innocent. those records can be prejudicial, even if the person wasn't convicted. So the idea is we're going to get them off the record so they're not held accountable for something that we're convicted of. My thinking as a journalist is sometimes the lack an acquittal or a dismissal or something cannot be justice. Sometimes it could be something else, and sometimes the public needs to be able to access these things. And a lot of times we don't know if a court case is important until maybe years after the fact, that we say, oh my gosh, this person was acquitted. Why were they acquitted? Was he somebody's brother-in-law? Was there corruption in place? Was there some sort of bigotry playing a role? We had a debate about that. This is something the legislature did. I mean, do you have a perspective on that, Celia? As somebody, again, who has worked to open up access to these records, do you have a point of view on that?
Yeah, I do, and that is you already hit just at the end of what you were saying. You hit on it. It's the legislature issue. We'll do what the legislature tells us to do. If the legislature wants us to keep records more confidential, we'll do that. If they want us to open up, we'll do that. My feeling though is if they're open, they should be open. The judicial branch shouldn't be the branch that makes determinations. That should be a legislative function. The legislature should tell us. I mean, I strongly believe there are some files that should be closed, files involving juveniles, files involving mental health issues, those types of things.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, for being on the show. I certainly appreciate talking to you. And I always enjoy, we had your colleague, Justice Crothers, on last time he was up for election. And this is going to sound bad. I was shocked by the amount of listeners we had. I mean, it was one of our most popular shows. And I thought, oh, we're just talking to some boring justice from the Supreme Court. So I think the public is interested in this. And I think it's a part of our government that people don't pay attention to as much as they should, or at least they don't until there's something sexy happening before the court.
Yeah.
But this touches on so many of our lives. I don't know. It's fascinating to me. Hopefully our listeners found it fascinating as well. Thank you for your time today.
Have a great day.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up our interview with Chief Justice Jon Jensen. And you were saying a little bit during the break, Patrick, that Patrick, my goodness, I looked at your Zoom name. It says Patrick Fink, and I called you Patrick. Sounds like you're in trouble and on your principal.
Yeah.
You were remarking that sort of the consensus of the people you talked to is that the Chief Justice Jensen did a pretty good job during his tenure. And I concur with that. When you think, he's coming off the longest serving Chief Justice is there a Chief Justice in the whole country that served as long as he did? I don't know. Certainly the longest in North Dakota history, and then steps right into the pandemic, which did all sorts of weird stuff, and it was not fun for anybody to go through. So he says he's done a pretty good job. I think he has. I think he's done a pretty good job.
Yeah, and I think just modernizing the courts, getting into the technology issues, expanding the courts. We had a surge of caseload in the last 10, 15 years. And dealing with all that, I think universally people think he did a pretty good job in that role. And I'm glad to hear he's going to continue to serve as a justice, because I think they also, and not just the administrative side of this, but also I think people think he's a reasonable, thoughtful, conservative leaning justice. And so I think for all those reasons, it's good that he's going to stay on the job. I would be surprised if he runs for re-election. But he made a great point, though, about not only the Supreme Court, but also the district court judges. We've got to be fairly happy with what we've done in terms of who's serving when you have so few real challenges. And if there are challenges, they're usually coming from gadflies. kind of the fringe of the legal world who have a, axe to grind or whatever. So, I just think overall he's done a good job shepherding that institution and the related district courts through a real changing times for the courts. So,
Well, I've liked his work, increasing pay for judges. I mean, I'm with you. I don't my initial I'm biased against the idea of just increasing spending, but on the other hand, sometimes it's necessary. We talk about like recruiting lawyers to sit on the bench. These are people who can make a lot of money in the private sector. And we want some of those private sector people. Again, these are judges, what do you say, judges of general jurisdiction? Is that what it was? Where they're handling civil, they're handling criminal. You don't just want criminal defense attorneys. You don't just want prosecutors. I mean, you certainly want some of them, but you also want people who have handled have litigated big civil cases. You want them there. You want that experience on the bench as well. That's important. So his work to increase pay for judges, I thought was very important. I'll tell you one thing I'm sorry. I'll tell you one thing I kind of wanted to ask him about was the abortion case that it would have been inappropriate to ask him about it because he can't talk about it. So we didn't ask him about that. But that's been hanging out there for a while. And I'm curious how that's going to come down.
yeah, that's like when you asked him about Jared and Lisa. You knew the answer before that was one of those
You
questions
never
where
know. You never know. Maybe he gives us something. You don't know till you ask.
Well, okay. No, but as far as the payroll, I mean, the reason I brought it up was because, if you don't pay doctors well enough, you don't get the best doctors. Same thing. Now, that's not to say everybody, including university presidents, aren't probably overpaid in the system. Maybe chancellors, I don't know. But that's going to create some firestorm for me later. But the bottom line is that when you have a judge, just like if you hire your own attorney, you want the very best people you can find, not just people that have experience, but that are smart, that are good at it. So I think that was an important point, that something they had to address, because we were abysmally paying judges prior to the kind of the latest surge in that. I mean, what you were getting were, quite frankly, only people that couldn't make it in private practice.
Let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk about the government. Speaking of government workers getting paid, the government shutdown, which we're recording this on Wednesday, so my column this morning was that it's over, nobody wins. You see some winners. Although I will say the headline's a little inaccurate because it's not really over yet. The Senate passed something. Now the House has to concur with it. And there is still ample room for idiocy before we get this thing done. So it's not really over, but certainly the Senate part's over for now, depending on what the House does. Hopefully it's over for good, but I don't know. I see.
House.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, fortunately, the original House vote was more bipartisan, but so, I mean, you've got a wider net to cast there. And of course, you always have the Freedom Caucus and people like that could step into the breach. And yet it does appear that's going to be clear sailing. The president's expecting to sign that legislation, maybe even later today or tomorrow. So, but it's not something that ramps up quickly. But I think what's lost in a lot of the discussion about, and again, I do think Republicans probably didn't win, but there's no question about the fact that the Democrats, when they capitulated, when they caved, became the loser. I don't want to characterize what Republicans did as winning, because it's a pox on all your houses kind of thing, is I think what the general public's done. But certainly, and in fact, Schumer even now is facing a challenge for his leadership role. So I don't think those things have quite been figured out yet, but at least initially I'd say that the Democrats lost, Republicans broke even at best. But I think what's lost in the debate is that the core of the debate really came down to a couple of central themes. One is SNAP benefits, and the other is the American Care, ACA subsidies, Obamacare, as most of us know it, subsidies. And these are serious things that we have to address, because the costs of these programs are exploding. And we're never going to get on top of government spending if we don't have the will to address these kind of things. I don't think a CR is the way to address them, but we have got to now spend some time, especially the healthcare subsidies. the reason why people are falling off, or if they didn't get the subsidies, the reason they're struggling to pay is because healthcare has become too expensive. And quite frankly, if we don't do something about this, we're just gonna there'll come a point where government can no longer afford, no matter how big the subsidies afford, to keep that system going. It was promised to be the great saving of the healthcare industry, and in fact, it's done quite the opposite. It's increased cost. It's increased the reasons costs go up. I mean, we have got to have serious debates about that and about SNAP. And part of that discussion is how liberal we've applied the people who get those things. As you know, Rob, I support, kind of taking care of and helping the least of us. But that being said, is when you look at, everybody qualifies for the subsidies in the healthcare world. I mean, there are people in this world that shouldn't get those subsidies. And yet, we gave them to everybody. Same thing with SNAP. I love the fact that North Dakota is looking at eliminating things like soda pop and some of the candy,
I agree
those
with that.
things from the, but also, we radically expanded the people who qualified for that. At the very least, there should be once you get past kind of the 200% of poverty, there should be some sort of a mean scale that ratchets down to a point where you don't get either. So we've got to have a serious discussion about these issues, or 10 years from now, we'll be facing the same problem, only with accelerated costs.
We are going to, on Friday's show, have an interview with a longtime North Dakota healthcare executive about some of that. So we're really going to delve into it. But I think the number one SNAP is whatever. They're going to reopen the doors. I'm glad we're doing some stuff, narrowing the focus on what could be paid for. I don't think people need to be buying candy bars and soda with their SNAP. It's supposed to be the supplemental nutrition program. If you want candy bars and soda, buy it with, there's a work requirement there too. Buy it with your own money. We're going to make sure you don't starve. So we're going to buy you fruits. We're going to buy you vegetables. We're going to buy you meat, pasta, and keep you fed. But the luxury stuff, work for those things. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. Snap's at this point, though, is really just about opening the doors again. The pressing problem is healthcare. And that's why I'm not sure Republicans win long term, because given some of the things that Donald Trump has been saying, and whoever knows what to take seriously that comes out of his mouth, but the real problem is, this is what Americans, whether they're on the Obamacare exchange or not. I mean, first of all, we're talking about more than almost 11% of the North Dakota workforce are independent workers who are on the independent plan. You're talking about farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs. Those people, that's about 45,000 people. But even beyond that, I mean, how many North Dakotans are going through this open enrollment period and they're seeing what their new contribution to their health insurance plans are, and it's bigger than whatever raise they got? That is a lot of North Dakotans that are facing that right now, where, you got a 2-3% raise, but inflation took a chunk of that, if not all of it. And then on top of it, your health insurance is going up. And that's not the employer's fault, because if you look on their side of the contribution, their side went up too. I mean, the employers aren't choosing to do this to people. They're trying to foot the bill, but what do you do? It is intractable. And I just don't know what to do about it, Pat. We've had Insurance Commissioner John Gottfried on a couple of times. And I'm at the point where I'm talking to him. Maybe the doctors and the hospitals and everything need to come to him to get their rates approved. Like, maybe that's what needs to happen, because this is out of control.
Well, and actually, I've come to the conclusion that we need to scrap it and start over. We've messed it up so bad in this country that we need to be radical in the solution. While there are some tweaks, and we'll talk about that in the Friday show, there are some tweaks that we can do that all help, that we don't seem to have the political will to even do that. Although I am encouraged to see that we're starting to talk about, drug prices and negotiating at least some of those. But, we're going to have to muster the political will. And while I appreciated Commissioner Godfrey's comments on the need for these subsidies for the very reason you just outlined, that's a Band-Aid at the very best.
Yeah. And to be clear, he wasn't saying that's a long-term solution. He's saying we have to continue them in the short term, because otherwise people are going to get whammy big time.
Well, and honestly, I differentiate a little bit even with him. I think we need to take a hard look at who gets them and how much they get. There has to be some means application to this, or we're just making the problem worse. So, but he is right to sound the alarm because you're right. Right now, people are dealing with that reality, and they're going from having subsidies to no subsidies, and that'll be a fairly shocking thing. And I actually think the number is greater than 11% because keep in mind, they incentivized business to move away from the plans that they offered to the exchanges. So not only do you have people who are privately, the 11% that work for themselves, you also have people that in the business world ended up moving from a private paid plan to a ACA plan. And so, yeah, it's a serious problem. And I think John was good to raise the flag now, but we have got to look at long-term solutions at this. And there are some things that have been proven to work. What we need is the political will to talk about it and then do it.
Yeah, I don't know how to get there. Hey, another interesting thing that came up, and I certainly didn't want to talk to the ask the Chief Justice about this either. Although it's not before the state supreme, it's a federal lawsuit that's been filed against. So North Dakota has on the books a statute. And we've talked about this on the show a little bit before, but my guest co-host today maybe has a unique perspective on it. North Dakota has a law under the Corrupt Practices Act that makes it illegal to propagate misinformation on billboards, political ads. The legislature recently expanded it because previously it was kind of written in another age, so it was focused on sort of legacy type media, updated it to include more digital media, social media, email, whatnot, texting. Right before the last election, we saw before the last primary, we had that heated, what was it, 5-way primary that Julie Fedorchak ultimately won. But right as North Dakotans are going to the polls, all of a sudden they're getting text messages saying that Julie Fedorchak had withdrawn. So it's stuff like that that is obviously not acceptable. Brandon Pritchard, who is a former lawmaker, I call him a troll. I think that's the accurate way to describe it. He has filed a federal lawsuit against that law. Now, I looked, the federal courts have struck down laws like this in other states. I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to uphold North Dakota's law. I think it's probably going to get struck down. As a legal matter, I think Pritchard's probably right. Pat, as a political matter, I'm kind of scratching my head at somebody wanting to be an advocate for dishonesty in politics. Like that's the position, that's the hill you're going to die on. That seems odd to me.
Well, and first of all, I have to tell you that you have to be clear here. This isn't misinformation. It is willful and intentional fabrications that you're
portraying. The statute mentions misleading, though. I mean, the statute's a little problematic in that because, the problem is, if I make a political argument, that's a common rebuttal, right? Like you're being misleading, you're lying, you're leaving things out. Well, that's just debate. That's just politics. I don't want to make that illegal. I like the idea of something that is demonstrably factually wrong. You can't do that.
Well, and doing it intentionally.
Right.
That's the other thing. This is a criminal charge. And so to make it criminal, it should be intentional as well. But I have grave concerns about a world without the law. I supported the passage of the law and the expansions. I support it today. I think it's necessary.
When did the law pass? When was it first created? It's been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah. It's been some time, but it has been addressed a number of times over the years. Usually with, after some election where somebody felt wronged, they'll put in some, and sometimes the answers have been overkill. But I do support the law, and I do support including the new age of media and communication tools. And the thing that I worry about, and I'm not surprised that Brandon's doing this because, of course, this was his favorite tactic in the last election, really not just, skirting the edge, but in several cases, especially here in Bismarck, we saw several of his campaigns against standing legislators as being not true. I mean, actually being outright lies that he was trying to sell to get people to vote against people. Now, fortunately, they didn't work. That's the good news. But in order for it not to work, you've got to have the wherewithal to fight back, right? And that doesn't always happen. But what I worry about is now, if he is successful, then the rule of the land is that you can go out there and say anything you want, no matter how outrageous about it, and pummel somebody, and especially if you have greater resources, you can pummel somebody to death and beat them with stuff that is factually not true, not misleading, but just blatantly a lie. And that's the world that I don't want to see come to politics. We've already got enough churn and public, concern over those kinds of things. I don't think we need to make it worse, and that's certainly the world I see if he is successful in blowing up this law.
Now, some of our listeners might be a little bit confused because they're thinking, well, what about libel? What about slander? Those are civil statutes. Those are where you can be held civilly liable if you libel or slander somebody. You go on the radio and you say they committed a crime when they didn't commit a crime, stuff like that. Those are civil remedies. Where this is distinct is this is in the criminal code where you can be charged. I think it's a Class A misdemeanor under the law. So this is the government coming in, and we're putting the government in a position. I will admit, I have some skepticism of laws like these. And we are, though. We're living through an era where just about anybody, and by the way, I think when I first wrote about this, I said, and we talked about it on the podcast, I had said that I wasn't aware of this statute ever really being used. The Dwayne Sand, I guess back in 2018, there was a dust up. I don't think it ever got to the point of a conviction or anything like that. But I apparently, North Dakota law enforcement has been investigating Pritchard under this statute. Now, no charges have been filed or anything like that. I think something like this is tough to enforce. I really do. When you get down into the minutia. And sometimes I wonder, Chad, you're not Chad, you're Pat. Sometimes I wonder if the better solution, because I'm as frustrated as anybody else when you look at things on social media and it's just like, that's not even as a matter of opinion. That is demonstrably false. That is false. When people are saying they're promoting the wrong election date, or like they did with Julie Fedorchuk, where they're saying she pulled out and she really didn't, things like that. That really bothers me. I think there has to come a point where we need to change some of the liability for some of these digital platforms, especially because the way things work now, if I write something libelous in the Fargo Forum, we're liable for that. But if somebody publishes something libelous on Facebook, Facebook is not liable for that. And I think that's wrong. We've given them a loophole. I understand the arguments for it, but look at the door it's opened. I mean, at some point, somebody needs to be actually responsible for the things that are getting published on these mediums, whether it's a billboard or a social media website or through an email service, all of that. If it's something like, they need to be able to demonstrate that they're acting against stuff like this, because the bad actors are just going to keep coming.
I think that's just it. It's about accountability and being able to enforce that. I get your skepticism on that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It's there's a lot of things that I know that you don't particularly like the porn age verification, because it's I think you see it as kind of
I want to be clear, not in favor of kids looking at porn.
Right? No,
Skeptical of
yes.
whether that particular approach is going to work.
But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Is my point. Same thing here. And you mentioned the libel and slander criteria, but remember that people in public office or public figures, the bar for that is much higher to get anything meaningfully done there. Yet, again, the fundamental difference between even that in this is the intent. That you intended to go out there and use information that was factually incorrect and you knew it. And that's where it strikes the criminal level for me, is when you did it on purpose. Everybody can make mistakes, and then you should be, subject to libel and slander laws. But when you did it on purpose, think of the world we would live in if that was the baseline, is that you could say or do anything with no consequence. And consequence matters here.
I would argue that we're living in that world, Pat.
Well, I'm not happy about it because
Neither am I.
and it also means you don't get quality candidates. Let's just talk about the political realities. How many people have I talked to in the last 10 years that don't want to run because of the stuff they have to put up with? Now, there are also cases where, that information has gotten out there and people found the truth about some candidates that it's different when you're talking about stuff that candidates don't want you to know. But when it's not true, that's the level that drives a lot of people away from public service. And so,
I think I would argue that that's almost a tactic. When I'm thinking of the process to fill the vacancy in District 42, Emily O'Brien. Mr. Pritchard, who now claims to be attending the University of North Dakota Law School, he was involved in that process. But Dustin McNally was put through the ringer. And you look at somebody like him, he's a good candidate, educated guy. He's an engineering professor at the University of North Dakota, Republican guy. I would say pretty moderate type. He should be the sort of person that we want to come forward, and the voters are going to decide whether he's the one they want in office or not. And that's the process. But he's the sort of he's qualified. He's interesting. He's smart. He's got some ideas. He's who we should want to step forward for these offices. And he just gets gets put through. And he won. I mean, don't get me wrong. He won, but it was a completely absurd process. And I think there's a tactic where they don't want people like that to come forward. They're going to make the process so ugly, nobody wants to participate in it, so that they're the only ones left in the room and they get what they want.
Well, and that unfortunately is where we're headed. Is that either that or you're going to see both sides of this equation go to it'll be a race to the bottom, and that's what's going on with this. Is if that's the only way to get things done, then that will have a race to the bottom. And luckily people do. I mean, Brandon lost his race largely because he got busted on what he was doing in Bismarck. And the fact that there was a really good candidate in Mike Berg that beat him. So, I mean, it's not that it will necessarily always create the worst outcome, but it also opens the door that it could and makes it harder to attract the kind of people like you just said that we really want in those offices.
Well, we're going to put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can always call, leave us a voicemail, send us a text, 701-587-3141. We've been getting a lot of great feedback that way of late. So very happy. Please do that, 701-587-3141. Follow us on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, X. Our handle is Plain Talk ND on all of those things. Coming up on Friday, we touched on it a little bit. We're going to continue this healthcare debate. Marvin Lean, former CEO of the Mid-Dakota Clinic, that's Essentia Health. He's going to be on coming up on Friday. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. This is going to sound bad. I was shocked by the amount of listeners we had.